We're about to be live.
And you don't have to start, I'll start that. Okay. Right back here. All right. So thank you. I'll give everybody a chance to get into the space with us, but thanks everybody for tuning in today. There's a lot of things going on in our community, and so a Race in America conversation is essential for us. I just wanted to say for the record that today's presentation is not only a part of our Race in America series that we've been doing as an organization since 2015, but this one is sponsored by the Center for Art Research. And today our guest, LaTanya Autry, is here with us to help us kind of work through some clarity and some understanding about, white supremacy in America and how that's affecting us. I think we wanted to go over several different ideas and thoughts that are important to us, but recently in our community, I can't go on without saying that there has been a loss of life in our community due to white supremacist violence. And we wanted to take a moment to recognize that there was a life lost that was in commitment to anti-racist rhetoric and violence. And so if we can just take a moment to think of that person in the moment of silence to honor, our friend. All right, so thank you so much. Whew. So actually I'm sitting inside of our space. We're at Holding Contemporary in an archive, a Liberated Archives experience that is based on white supremacy in our community. And this is called Filling Documents. And the reason that we decided to use the word filling and documents in this CFAR exhibit that is about the habits of denial is because a lot of people over the last couple of years of organizing, I've learned that a lot of people do not see races. They don't see race. They don't understand racism. They don't understand why things are about racism. And a lot of people say that white supremacy is no longer an issue or a burden for America. But I put these documents up that are from, our historical context up until current times that basically show what racism is systemically in our society. And the documents consist of not only headlines from news agencies over the years, but it consists of FBI documents, CIA documents, and other notes and letters from people affected by violence that is, upholding white supremacy and those that want to fight back. And so because of the Freedom of Information Act and because of all these different opportunities to get access to documents that were historically not available, we were able to access them through this program in partnership with the Phil Knight Library and the University of Oregon archives and their historians that supported us in getting documents that we needed. Another part of this installation includes a lot of faces of people, and we worked with a design organization called Omnivore to basically create what I think is like mirroring The Shining. I asked the designer, have you ever seen that picture in The Shining at the end where the man that is trying to kill his family becomes a part of the images that he sees on the wall? And I wanted to create what those images would look like if we utilize real actual people, not just performers or entertainers for a story, but the reality of our lives. And so our version of The Shining has taken over, and we call it the racist faces. And that's a term that was coined through a song by Tupac Shakur called Changes. And yeah, one of the lines was, still I see no racist, I see racist, all I see is racist faces. And so I wanted people to consider what that looks like in real life when the racist faces are the people that are upholding society's values of white supremacy, are our elected leaders, or our law enforcement, or our teachers and educators and community leaders. How do you not see racism when they are upholding it in a violent way? And maybe if you see their faces and you learn about their deeds, maybe that'll help you understand it. So not only does this installation include all of that, we have reference and links that'll be available to people on our website so that they can do that research. I just wanted to open up with talking to LaTanya and asking you, obviously I know you've heard about everything that's going on in Portland, and I wanted you to be able to speak on that and just really what's happening in the world from your own thoughts. We only have an hour, which at first it seemed like that was a whole lot of time, but now it's actually, you know, with all the feelings and everything that's happening, I don't think we ever have enough time to talk about white supremacy and how it affects us in our everyday life and what people are doing to decenter it. I know that you have the Center for Black Liberation, and I know that you're doing work in that community space to kind of address these issues, because Black liberation is our values in this white supremacist world. So if you don't mind sharing, and sorry for this bad introduction.
Oh, no, it's wonderful. You know, Teresa, thank you so much for inviting me to be in conversation with you. It's been wonderful to hear about this exhibition that you put together and knowing about your work. And unfortunately, this timing, because, you know, the what just recently happened in Portland, I'm sad to say, but I'm always like, white supremacy is every day in the United States. It's just, you know, and the violence that happens through these killings and other forms are pretty much regular. You know, they happen in these spectacle kind of moments at time, but they never leave us, unfortunately. It seems like it's impossible to get rid of this. So your show is coming at another pivotal moment. You know, it's sad to say, I wish it was always just history that we're talking about, but it's not. It's our history and it's our today. You know, Malcolm X, today is the anniversary of the murder of Malcolm X. And, you know, he said a lot of brilliant things, but one of them that he said in his speech is something about we weren't brought over here to be citizens. You know, that's not why they brought us here. So it's something to think about when we continue to have these same problems. And we are like, how can this be the case when many of us, you know, like 50 years ago, there were all these protests that people were doing and weren't these big changes that happened, you know, those changes happen and they did make some, you know, important change, but also the pushback, you know, the reactionary pushback against it was constantly going on as well. And I think it's pretty devastating actually to see where this country is today. A lot of things from the past are still with us in really frightening ways and seem like they're getting worse in some ways too. I don't hardly know what to say about all this violence that's going on, except to highlight in all these processes that people are putting in place to keep it going. And this reaction of people who are like, I don't know that racism exists, or I don't think it does. It's not that bad. All of these minimization of the situation we're in, the conditions, is also violent. And I guess the thing that does make me feel hopeful is the work of some people like yourself and the people in your organization, Don't Shoot Portland, and other organizations like that are just keep doing this work. You know, they keep connecting, they keep trying to find other ways to fight through information, through bringing people together and meeting young people that are out here doing some important change work. That's the stuff that keeps me hopeful. But I have to say, you know, these moments where you're just like, again.
When I was a child, I remember watching Roots when Alex Haley came out with the series. And I remember watching the series and still I understood what had been done to us. But even though we were going to school during the time that series was happening and we were in family during that time, society didn't come up with a prescription for what to do. It was like, hey, you have this knowledge. And a lot of times we were being humiliated because of the knowledge. And so I'd learned over the years, I would witness over the years how people would be like, you know, I don't want to hear any more movies about slavery. I don't want to hear any more movies about white supremacy, as if hearing it was a factor in shame for us. And I never saw it as anything that I should be ashamed of. I just felt like, wow, our country, even though we say freedom and liberty and that, you know, we're the melting pot of the world, and there's this democracy that is supposed to be so elegant, that had not been my experience. And in witnessing, movies about slavery and TV shows about it, and even learning more about it through encyclopedias and different literature, I never saw that there was a resolution that was being developed for it. And so I always knew that our entitlement through all of this was the fact that we had an opportunity to protest or to speak out or to demand change or to create social change through our honest relationship and commitment to ourselves as humans. But then again, becoming an adult and seeing how, as a child, you thought that all we had to do was wait on Dr. King to do another I Have a Dream or look for the next king. And if they were elegant enough, they could tell the world. I always thought that was not enough, but there was never anything that we could grasp to make it valuable for us to all be that voice. Because with Dr. King, let's say, he had a generation that was, he was focused on the children. When I think about the Selma and all the things that were happening in Alabama and all the things that were happening at his protest, he was working with youth. He was bringing the children up so that they could see themselves in the future and they could work through their lifetimes to make that happen. And we got to witness John Lewis do just that. And I'm wondering, when is it going to be loud enough, our love for one another and our strength through all of this trauma, that we create an infrastructure for it to continue and for it to be centered. I was saying earlier that we're not doing enough to marginalize white supremacists, but we do a lot to marginalize those who would fight white supremacy, who would say that it needs to be dismantled, that would speak to abolition or land back. And so, what is your thoughts about that? The necessary decentering of white supremacy not happening and the obligation to build resources so that we can learn from the past. I mean, with CRT being a thing that's up for debate, I don't know how much it makes sense for me to even ask you that question, but your thoughts.
Well, they've been outlawing us forever since, they brought us over here, like I said, Malcolm X said, to be enslaved people, for them to work for free for them. And they've outlawed us all along. So the CRT, whatever mess is going on is just an extension of that same kind of thinking, right? When they had laws that made it so that Black people wouldn't be able to read. It's the same thing for real. Yeah, it's crazy. I grew up in this moment too, the post Black Power movement. And I think they did some tricky work, in the late 70s to 80s with this multiculturalism kind of rhetoric. So I grew up in that time, and I remember as a kid kind of being like, everybody is equal. We're all friends. Everybody's holding hands, and you could get a doll where it's in each color, whatever. People from all countries, nationalities are together and they're holding hands. And my mom was like, yeah, that's cute. And I remember thinking, wow, she is really rough. This is great. She's like, yeah, that's the picture, and it took me a while because I would just be like, oh, she's extreme or something. No, she was right. That is the picture. That is a picture that was given to us. And I think a lot of us believe it. And in some ways, that should be the case. It's just not that it is the case, though. And because I think what they did is they pushed the attention away from, and I think this actually happened earlier in the 60s too. And different people have talked about this, like James Cone. I've been reading his book, A Black Theology of Liberation. And he talks about civil rights people who really got focused on the integration part, but they weren't focused on, the rights part as much. They were, but they thought that how you get your rights is through the integration. We really need to be with these white people. And others have kind of shown how that was really problematic and destroyed a lot of spaces for Black people. Like Bell Hooks has talked about it in her book, Teaching to Transgress. And she talks about how schools, and there was teachers that actually cared about Black students and they knew their students. And then when this push came to integrate the schools, they pushed these kids in these other schools in places where they didn't want us to be. Instead of thinking about, we want funds to for our schools to be put into these spaces and build them up, rather than let's get rid of spaces that are majority Black. And so there was a certain kind of work that happened, I think, really starting in the 60s with that heavy push on integration versus this narrative being against segregation and being against the discrimination and racism, but not that we necessarily have to be in spaces with white people. Like it's a thing where I think people think it's the same thing, and it's not actually. And I think it's one of, we didn't make the focus so much about dismantling racism. That kind of just went away. And then you see it especially heavy in the 80s. It's like, we can just stop talking about all that, and then we'll just do this multiculturalism type of approach. And if we just say this, if we just create this certain kind of narrative or rhetoric, then it is, without actually doing any of the work, you know? And so there was this moment where there was affirmative action that was supposed to be happening, and then that's been just chopped down, like left and right attacked to get rid of affirmative action. And I think it's some really interesting like campaigns that have happened, and many of us bought into it. Like, people will say now, I don't need affirmative action because that's just for people who can't cut it on their own, who don't have merit or something like that. And so they're actually Black people that really believe that affirmative action is hurting them, and there shouldn't be the case, even though this country had like 400 years of slavery or something. And we really have not had any kind of deep reckoning to actually change the system. And like I said, as I grew up in this time, the post-Black power movement, in that time when multiculturalism was the start, and now it's the names of these things keep shifting. Now it's more, they call it, they went in the 90s, early 2000s, we were all on diversity and inclusion. And now it's kind of morphed into the equity focus. But again, not with the focus of, actually all the institutions in the United States are pretty much rife with racism. Like that's what the United States is. It's white supremacy and being colonizers. This is land where this is a settler colonialist nation, and we're sitting on land that was stolen from people from genocide. And again, no real reckoning of that. You get some places that say some little like land acknowledgement at the beginning of a program, but we're not really dealing with what does that mean. And actually enslaved people were used to expand settler colonialism. We were used to build up this settler colonialist nation. So some of this work, when you take it upon yourself, when you start learning it and you keep learning it and getting involved in it, and then you commit to doing this work, you know that most people are not going to like this, and that includes Black folks. That includes the people who are in marginalized groups, because so many of us have really bought into these campaigns that have been going on our whole life before we were born. These certain kind of narratives that we've been so steeped in, it is very hard to see anything else. And sometimes there's some of us who get it, and then it's traumatic too. I mean, I have to say, many times I was just like, oh my God, I can't believe I believe this, stuff that I'm still unlearning. Like last year, I learned some more stuff where I'm like, I'm embarrassed to say that I was part of these, really messed up kind of thinking systems. I just didn't know.
It's like as if the shift or the blame of racism and the subjection of being enslaved became a shift. It shifted to the Black people. It was our burden. It was like, let's help these people pull themselves up by the bootstraps, that racist rhetoric. Let's help them become more engaged with the community. That integration, it wasn't for us to be safer or for us to have more. It was for us to feel better about what we had done wrong, and now people were going to help us. I remember when the Ferguson uprising happened and the youth had went to a it was a baseball game. And I remember them out there protesting. And one of the things that some of the people standing in line were saying, like, what are you guys out here for? We saved you. We ended slavery for you. What is wrong with you? And I was like, wow, like, you literally benefit from our community being enslaved, our elders, our ancestors being enslaved. You benefit economically, systemically, politically, and we don't. And the fact that people would want to include us so that they can feel better, not so that we can be safe or so that we can have access to those same resources. That is so delusional. It's difficult to deal with. Even in 2020, when I first heard everybody start, calling us POCs, and I was like, what is this? I'm not a POC. Like, you're literally saying that I want to be in this movement for Black lives because this is going to benefit all of us. But instead of centering the violence that's happening to Black people, we're going to center all of, like you said, the multiculturalism. We're going to center all of the communities of color so that we can win together. And again, we're not going to win on that. We've done that historically so many generations over and over. And until we center those vulnerable communities that are being violently interrupted in their lives, that have to worry about their children being able to live on their way home, unless we take seriously the accounts that have been shared with us and we start working on those issues, no matter who is in solidarity with us, we're still going to be the most vulnerable. We're still going to lose lives. Even, I remember a couple of years ago when I first became a community organizer and started working with institutions like the museum and other ones, they would say, hey, we're going to give you like full ride scholarships for children in your community. And I would say, why not just start building relationships with people in my community? You're still making me a gatekeeper to help you find those people that should receive this opportunity. And unless you change the system of your institution to where it's more fully inclusive for people like me, whether you create foundational, trust to address issues of access, or whether you, build framework that is, managed and supervised and developed by people like me and paying them to do that work, and not just look like me, but really working through a lens of anti-racism with understanding of what anti-Blackness is and how that perpetuates these issues. So what do you, like I said, there's so much going on and there's so many different things to think about. But it's so important that we look at what's been happening, because when I first started hearing POC, it reminded me of the anti-Blackness of trying to, fight being other, and how violent that is. And then I got to witness it, how people were able to kind of not undermine, but they were centering themselves and again, alienating families affected by violence, affected by police brutality, affected by racism. I remember that Tamir Rice's mom had said something, publicly about it. She was like, hey, y'all are messing up our movement because a job is not what we're looking for. We want justice. We want our children to be safe. We want the entitlement of having an anti-lynching bill, that would basically legislate or mandate our safety and, prosecute people that would want to harm us. And we don't have any of those things. We couldn't even get the George Floyd Act to pass. And these are not things that we are just doing in our generation. These are things that we fought forever. When Dr. King said that, I believe that I've led my people into a burning house, I just want to know from you, what do you think he meant by that?
Oh gosh, yeah, all of these things that you just said. Well, that particular quote, I think he's starting to see, the failures in the US system in general. And then, knowing that people had been excluded from benefiting from these things for decades or hundreds of years, I can understand why that became the focus in a way, the integration. But then when you start to really understand what the system is, it's like, wait a minute. And I think for me, I'm questioning a lot of our discussion about equality and equity. I'm a little like, I don't even know if I really want to be equal to people who are this vicious. Like something is wrong with them. Like this is a whole system of insanity, of just parasitism to use people up. And then to think that we want to be equal to, in a way, I was trained under that kind of thinking, forever. But then in the last 10 years or so, I've been really questioning this whole focus on equality. And I'm like, equality in a completely other, equation possibly. But within this equation of the United States is a sick place. Like it's sick from day one. Like, it starts off really, really messed up. And I think, when Dr. King is saying that, I think that's more towards, unfortunately, he didn't, get to live that long because he was murdered. but toward the end of his very young life, is he's questioning the kind of processes of this focus mostly on being integrated within a white supremacist culture. It only can equal something not good. And I think he's starting to see that. Yeah, like so much stuff that you were just saying, like the people of color thing. Well, that starts earlier too. During slavery times, there were people who became free, or for, I don't know all of like every instance, but however they became free, some people they fought for the right to call themselves people of color. They didn't want to be called like being associated with Black or African. They wanted, even though they were of that descendant, they wanted to be called people of color, and it was a way to establish themselves on a higher rank than these other people who are still enslaved and considered more African or something like that. So people of color is one of these terms that, I think some people more recently have been trying to use it and conflate it, and it makes everything is just the same. And that way they don't have to say the names of people from different cultural groups. So they think it's easier, some shorthand, but it is a way, I think, of often obscuring Black people. And it can end up being anti-Black. And so for many of us, like I just say anti-Blackness, and I'll say sometimes anti-Blackness, and I also say race and racism. And some people are like, oh, that's the same. And I'm like, not exactly. Because there's plenty of folks from other backgrounds who aren't Black, but aren't white, and they're actually anti-Black too. And so what I saw like in 2020, a lot of people were like, oh, let's jump on this moment where there's this pushback because there's global uprisings are happening. We saw cultural institutions and other places, a lot of these predominantly white places, they always are racist. That's just what they are. But they try to use that moment and be trying to show themselves as not racist or something by posting silly things, post on Instagram. It just shows you how embedded their racism is. They think some silly post that they put on IG, a black square, is going to signify something important. But then people thought, let's jump on that moment too and make it all about these microaggressions that we face. And it's like, okay, let's think about this. And this is where I think, that discussion like Ms. Rice and others have got into about the parasitism that we have going on. It's, yes, there are inequities and lots of racism and all this mess and anti-Blackness is in these institutions, but also there's just like the real oppression that's going on, like, or the extreme oppression that happened because where we see these uprisings is about death, right? It's people in the streets being murdered for nothing, and the state getting away with that. And so when we shift the narrative and make it be about jobs, which that is part, but not the main thing. And I think what's so problematic is that when whatever they want to call themselves, Black, POC, whatever these people are, when they wanted to shift and make it be about jobs, it was not that they were uniting with the movement against the anti-Blackness and the extreme violence that Black, and I would say also Native people experience at the hands of cops, especially, and Latinx people. They didn't unite. That story kind of got dropped. It's like, it wasn't that they were uniting with that fight and let's all change the society. It was kind of like, that's not a conversation we're going to really have any comments about, but we will talk about this over here. So it became all about job opportunities. And it's still kind of been that case, so places open up whatever, tenure track lines, and now people are going to hire for certain kind of job. And that's nice and all, but it's like, it is actually not connected to the movement work, the community work that was happening in the streets. And it's still happening, but that work is not really getting supported. And the people who are getting those jobs, some of them might connect with some of that movement work, but I would say probably a lot of them don't. I mean, I'm just generalizing because I don't, of course, know everybody who got these jobs, but it is not a requirement to be part of the movement to get that job. And we see, unfortunately, so often academics and others, people in museums and so forth, can be Black folks and other folks of color, but they can be just as violent and be part of the, white supremacist kind of thinking and actions, and be kind of sitting in spaces and being like, okay with being a token. I mean, I hate to say it, but it's true. Some people are really okay with being a token, as long as they benefit. And it didn't make a lot of shifts in deep ways that actually help a lot of people come along. It's just, it brought in one or two people who benefit for themselves, who probably, in the same systems are there. So the same systems that created the exclusion of forever are the same vetting processes. They're the ones making the decision. So they probably bring in people that they can control, because that's really what's happening. Those people they can control are not going to be trying to shift. This idea, I think, is people have talked about trickle down Blackness. So you put one person of color, one Black person in a position, and then you act like that's going to change the system eventually. I mean, we've seen that now for over 50 years. So it's like, that didn't work. We see that with mayors. We see that with cities where you can get a Black mayor and the city is still a lot of racism, a lot of anti-Blackness is on the regular happening in the city. So we already see that those methods don't actually change and disavow or dismantle anti-Blackness, but yet people are still willing to buy into it, at least the people who it benefits. I don't think poor Black people believe that. I think that's much more of a middle class kind of thing. And it's because it connects to capitalism. And, a lot of this stuff is, as long as a lot of people are okay with exploitation of others, as long as they figure they're not the ones being exploited, or not as much, they're willing to sell out other people. And I hate that that's true, but it's true.
It's a fact that we need to speak on more often. I remember I used to feel embarrassed as a community organizer to speak out against people in our community that were harmful because they looked like me. So I felt this need to protect them, right? And I remember my grandmother was telling me about, the days on the plantation. And she said, well, people used to get away with a lot of really vicious and violent acts because we didn't want to witness what was going to happen to them, or they were related to us and we didn't want to witness that, because you bear that trauma and the children witness that trauma and everybody has to relive that trauma. And so we wouldn't call out people from our own communities that would do that stuff because it was just a vicious cycle of violence. But now, I think about it in a different way. And I'm like, I saw somebody say something the other day that was like, defund performative actions. Defund that, and it was because all these companies started throwing dashiki colors and Black History Month memes all over the place. And they still have board of directors that are not, inclusive of anybody that is Black. They don't have representation in their businesses or in their products or their services or their outreach. There's no foundational, funding going in to kind of contribute to the educational access that a lot of people that are considered vulnerable would need in order to prospect those type of opportunities in their future. And so, the performative actions have harmed us. And I think, again, it's easier for people to say, you know what, that's not me. I mean, as a community organizer who lost my nephew to gun violence, for years, I had seen people that I knew personally in my community that wouldn't even walk on the same side of the street as me. They would cross the street or walk away or drive past me when they would see me, in traffic, and they would only speak to me if I was with someone that they considered reliable or credible. And the conversations they would have with me would always have to be in secret, like, girl, I support everything you're doing, but you're gonna have to try to figure out a different way to do it. And I'd be like, wow, they haven't figured out a different way to murder us. They haven't figured out a different way to extract opportunities from our community intentionally through mandates. They haven't found different ways to, lessen mass incarceration. And when we talk about the integration of schools, I remember that at a point, and when we look at history and we look at data, that's when we started seeing the increase in the disengagement of families, and we started seeing mass incarceration, because that investment in educating our children and having access to our children through community policing or integrated school systems, it gave them a firm opportunity to call us vulnerable, at risk, and marginalized. And I've never liked those words being used on us, because there was nothing that we've done since we were brought to this country that would create that opportunity for us. We were stolen people on stolen land, and then we were abused violently and tragically. And we're still in that same cycle. Reconstruction never actually happened. It turned into lynchings, you know, and I'm seeing the same thing now where people will say something like, oh, what you guys are doing is inciting the violence against you. And that's okay. Like, people are okay with saying that, like, you guys shouldn't protest this way, or you shouldn't do this way. And I'm like, wow, when are we going to denounce the violence that is politically mandated and approved and legitimized in outcomes like what we saw with Dante Wright's killer, you know, the officer Kim Potter in Minneapolis? It's like, oh, okay, so we're going to cry for her. We're going to use the words of Barack Obama to soothe the court. And then we're going to go ahead and give her a very light sentencing and a $1,000 fee because she didn't mean this, and we need to give her a second chance. These children that are being shot in their backs unarmed, they don't ever get an opportunity to have a second chance. We never see them as actual people. And I think that the undermining of our values as people and our value to society as people is a part of that mandate that we should be doing something different, and that it's not really the fact that we don't have all these opportunities. It's the fact that, and I look at propaganda from back in the day, America's vision of who we are as free people is that there are African Americans, good, upstanding people that will get along and will move along. And then there are these Negroes, these niggas, these thugs that will not participate. And it's because we don't, like what you said, it's, why would I want to participate or be equal with my oppressor? And why is it that everybody wants that to be a mandate on us surviving? It's like, you have to get along with these police so that they don't want to murder you. How insulting is that to say that to someone? I remember teaching Know Your Rights training to children in our community through the Boys and Girls Club and through all these different, you know, institutions, going to the high schools, going to the, you know, the colleges and stuff. And I remember a pastor from my community said, what are you doing? You're going to get them murdered. When we teach them the Know Your Rights training, we tell them that they need to talk to the officer and they need to, you know, do what they tell them to do, because these officers are already afraid of them. And I'm like, the fact that you have a relationship with somebody that is an institutional partner that will tell you in your face that they are afraid of your children and that they will murder them because of their fear of them. And then you can come to me and tell me to stop doing what I'm doing. You're not living in the same reality, or there is something really wrong with your understanding of what's going on. And I don't know what to call it, you know? Can you speak on that?
Yeah, this is I've been actually trying to understand this for things I'm writing about in my dissertation. I'm thinking about it as an illusion delusion kind of syndrome that seems like almost everybody is under something in this country. It's frightening because, yeah, this is a thing I think I question sometimes the various racial justice kind of work, because, and again, it's like, so what's the politics specifically? And a lot of people seem to be okay with a lot of people getting left behind, even though they will say that they're doing social justice work or racial justice work, but they're okay with, you know, as long as maybe it's some people can secede if they behave a certain kind of way. It's like all of these certain kind of weird so-called respectability kind of politics attached to it. If you operate like this, then we can save your life or we care about you. But if you do not meet this certain kind of standard, which has a lot of class elements to it, then we don't care about you as much. You're not worthwhile to save, you know. So a lot of times poor Black people just don't make the cut because they don't meet whatever the standard is. And people will tell you, oh, it's all about your behavior, and make that be the focus rather than it's actually a system, a structure that is just violent and determined to kill us. Like that's where the emphasis should go. And it will really, I think, take multiple types of approaches. Not, I mean, you can play some of that respectability stuff might be okay, some of it, but it's not the only way to do anything. And I actually have a huge issues with this kind of, let me train your kids to know the cops are people. It's like a whole thing. Like that's something I have to be like, oh gosh, I try not to go off on people so much in public, but wow, that's a big one in the arts. They love that in these art museums. It's like, let's get little poor Black kids or poor Latinx kids and bring some cops into the museum. And then the cops get to know the students and the students get to know the cops. And therefore the cops won't shoot them. And I'm like, no, please do not subject these kids to the police. Like that, talk about the power differential. Like this is insane. Children, cops, like, no, it's not because, oh, the cops, the kids were just being disrespectful, so the cops had to shoot them. No, that does not make any sense. But we actually in the arts, it's quite a few people who do these kind of routines. Artists, I want to slow down there because some people think everything that every artist does is perfect and all right. No. So artists can be on some dumb stuff, and curators and educators, a lot of people, and they will be thinking they're doing racial justice work. And that's the ones who think they're doing something. And then there's the people who are just flat out racist. It's so complicated, then it gets to be like, gosh, who can you talk to? And this is why I think it's so important to be in conversation with people for a while. Like you were talking about those organizations that they want to find one person. They basically want to tokenize you. You can be their good Black person. So they'll find the good Black, somebody that they can deal with who they think isn't going to cause them too much issues. And they can get that one Black person, one Black organization, and then do everything maybe through that one organization that they think they can control, instead of actually developing relationships and listening and just realizing a lot of these places really need to fire a lot of people. They need to fire the people who've been running a place forever, for decades and so forth. Their boards need to go. They just need to go. I'm not personally interested so much in these people sitting here taking these special classes so they can learn how to be not racist, and they need to take years to do it or something, when the rest of us just got born in this country and had to deal with this shit since forever, since kindergarten. I'm not interested in 40-year-olds taking diversity classes. Like, do that on their own time. They can take a special class and be on sabbatical for 3 years or something. Go learn that. Meanwhile, there are people right now who can be decent humans who could be in those positions. And then they can be in conversation and working with community in a bunch of kind of ways, in ways that go beyond thinking it is about basically a reproduction of the system, because that's what that is with the whole cop thing, with let's introduce cops to kids. Even when pretending it's this huge break in the system, it's not. It's just a reproduction of the system, but putting on a brown happy face on it or some stupidness. It's horrific to me, and I find it so insulting to see that a lot of times after years of work, that's all you get offered is some foolishness like that. And people will be, call you on the side and tell you, oh, you should take that. That's the best we can get. And I hate to see it. I hate to hear it, because I actually think a lot of us, and when I'm saying there's a lot of Black people and others, but a lot of us don't love ourselves enough. I think, it's hard enough to be like, you love other people that you aren't related to and who aren't your kids or whatever. But a lot of it, I think, really comes down to people loving themselves. And I hate to say it, because I just don't think they do. And that's why they're willing to take crumbs, or they're willing to let people kick them in the mouth. And then they will say, thank you. And that is some sadness. Like, that makes me really sad. And I don't say that because I think it's fun. I say it because I think it needs to be said. But gosh, more of us just need to love ourselves. This kind of goes back to stuff like, I think my grandma taught me this. And I didn't realize it was a revolutionary thing to hear that. And now I know it, decades later, I'm like, thank you, Grandma, because she already told me this. But having seen so many people in positions and will allow themselves to be treated so violently and will take it. I mean, I've heard people in top level jobs, Black folks that got top level jobs, will say stuff like, on the side, again, that thing where they call people up on the side, or they talk only to Black people when they think the whites, their bosses, aren't listening. They'll be like, I support you, but I can't say that publicly. I support you, but I can't get associated with that. And then it's like, just no, and I feel sorry for them mostly, because they think they're telling the unruly Black people how to behave right. so they can move up in the world. And I'm like, no, I feel sorry for you. You're the one that's got all kind of issues. And really, you just need to move away. Just go do whatever you do somewhere else. Because I know what I'm doing, right? I'm on a mission and I'm going to stick to it. But you go do that game somewhere else. And I call them the inclusionistas. That's what I call them. They are so obsessed with being part of these white supremacist systems. They aren't, they can move up in it. They aren't trying to challenge anything because they know that they can't. So even if it looks like they have a position of power, they don't have any power. They can't change anything and they know it. And that's why they say stuff like that. We're like, oh, I can't say that publicly. I'm like, if some of them do say it publicly, they say it in front of like 50 people, but they're 50 Black people. So they feel like it doesn't matter because they said it to us as long as their boss don't hear about it, the white folks. And that's where I'm just like, we are still on plantation mentality. And that's stuff that I hate. We're still on it.
And what's an incredible fact is that those unruly people are the reasons that they probably even have their opportunities. Those unruly people that are speaking up are the reason that people are even, listening to them or giving them any kind of access. But you don't want to uphold those people. And that just, again, it's hard to fathom where the mindset comes from, because as somebody that believes in anti-fascist work, because I understand that if I don't, that I am upholding the standard of white supremacy, it's just an incredible burden to bear to have to say that over and over again. It's just like when we first had to say, we're not saying that all lives don't matter. We're just saying that Black lives do matter. And until all lives matter, Black lives won't matter. Like, people act like they don't understand it. What was alarming to me even this morning was that, in regards to that murder that occurred here in our community against an anti-fascist person that was showing up against anti-Blackness in protest, that people from my communities that are, COP-appointed leaders, and I'll say COP-appointed leaders because obviously they're working for the county or working in partnership with the policing of our communities, we're calling anti-fascists a cult, and saying that people are not, they're standing on this whole cult dynamic to kind of overthrow the government or the world. And it's like, this system does not allow us to be human within it. And we are fighting to educate our community. And even in protests, we're building a olive branch to our political leaders to work with us to undermine the systems that are harmful to us. But the fact that they respond with violence and degradation, that is not our shame. And no one that is a beneficiary of that work for generations. Like Dr. King said, he was an anarchist. He did not, believe in that system. And he saw a reason to not believe in it because it wasn't designed for us. And there's other people that, had an anarchist mentality. And obviously they were called, communists and all these other things. But we've never even had a solid relationship with any ism that would support us as Black people. We either have to fall into line or we have to, it's just so complicated and so so much of our reality. Can you tell us? From your thoughts, what is anti-fascism? Because there is a very serious right now. I think the pandemic, we know it's racism. But the fact that people are using misinformation to kind of create propaganda around what's happening with racism is creating more of a violent response to us. I think, in my own opinion, that the murders that are happening to activists across the country and really across the world, and that have been happening before I was even born, and the abuse that is, railed out at them by law enforcement and by lawmakers, that it is because America, because of how we were created as a country, is not anti-fascist. It is a fascist country. And if you fight to disrupt that fascism or you fight to dismantle it, then you are the enemy. Do you want to speak on that?
Oh, sure. I was like, you just said a lot right there. I mean, fascism is about, it's an authoritarian type of rule. And for Black folks, this has always been fascist. This is, for some people, they're just like thinking things are becoming fascists in the last 2 years or something, or since, the last president or something. I'm like, no, actually, since the beginning. But, often this is the kind of thing about how a lot of people don't really acknowledge slavery and don't seem to just kind of memonize and act like it's nothing. It's like, no, that's actually kind of measure millions of people for hundreds of years under a regime of total control where they weren't one considered people really, or humans, and had no control over themselves and their children. That's a fascist state. So could be routinely raped to the point of like industrialized rape. That's how they made slaves. They had to force certain kind of activities to occur. We have been always a fascist state, and it isn't a surprise. Again, sad to say it, but part of this, I didn't grow up hearing it. This is a fascist country. I mean, I grew up knowing about certain things about slavery, but I had not grown up hearing the word fascist connected to slavery. Actually, it's more that as an adult later, and much later, so more on the recent side of things, started thinking about that as actual fascism. Learned about like the Holocaust, and learned about Nazi Germany as a fascist regime, but did not learn about slavery in this country as a fascist regime. And I think that's done on purpose to keep us very ignorant, all of us, but especially the people whose elders, whose ancestors were, especially harmed through that system. And that trauma stays with us forever. And like you were talking about earlier, there is a lot of shame, unfortunately, because it's not really our shame to have, but it's how these, it's some of it is psychological. I think it's just how things work out in people's minds, but it's also a certain kind of shaping and brainwashing that has occurred in this country. So people are ashamed of the fact that they have families that went through slavery, that were enslaved, right? And have wanted to reject that. So yeah, this has always been a fascist country for real. And to think about since the late 60s or something, Black people have really been able to vote in this country. Like, that is insane for only like 50 years and still not really, you were talking about, when we were talking about earlier about multiculturalism becoming kind of thing in the 80s. And we were talking about that, but also mass incarceration becomes a thing around the same time, right? They really start building that up to the point that it's outrageous, this country. So it's kind of like, if they can't force you to be a worker, to be enslaved on these plantations, and then that continued really through the Jim Crow period, that whole era really through like the 60s, there's still people forced to be on these plantations and working and stuff. So it's not been that many years that people have been so-called free, which is not free, because then they start up this whole mass incarceration kind of thing, that we've always been living under these states of being under a condition of being not in control of our lives, not being able to determine what, our own paths, really, being controlled by regimes. It is pretty daunting when you start to kind of put the pieces together. They don't give you the pieces usually. So, and now they're again trying to outlaw us from knowing this stuff by attacking critical race theory, which for the most part in these schools, especially like K through 12, is history class. And it's a history class that they just only started trying to teach a little bit more about what the histories are. But it's not, none of it is really surprising. Again, I'm sorry to say, but I grew up, one of the places I lived was in Texas as a kid. And I remember going to the library in like 4th or 5th grade in the 80s or something. And a teacher, I went to the library and my mom said to get a book about Dr. King to write for like a book report. And the librarian told me in this kind of snotty voice, something like, "We don't carry books like that here." And that was it. That's all she had to say. And I came home, my mom was like, "Well, where's the book?" I said, they told me they don't carry those kind of books. Almost like it was pornography that I was asking for. And that's still unfortunately the case. They're trying to, outlaw anything. We live under insane kind of conditions. And you mentioned John Lewis earlier. thinking about the voting rights, and the Voting Rights Act has been just basically chucked apart, torn apart by the Supreme Court. The courts have typically vote very conservatively in this country. This country has always been basically fascist. Like, it's just what it is. And today I was rereading an essay. I didn't even really reread the whole thing. It's a short essay, but it's by Toni Morrison. It's called Racism and Fascism. And it's in her book, The Source of Self-Regard. And it's a very short essay, but she basically says in here how racism and fascism, they don't have anything new to offer. They can change its dress, they can change how it looks on the surface, but it's always the same thing. And I was actually gonna share some of that earlier. I'm trying to find that quote. Oh gosh, it's such a good essay, and it's one that I didn't know about until I bought this book, and then I was like, oh wow, this is kind of great. Not trying to find the quote. Anyway, here she says, in 1995, racism may wear a new dress, buy a new pair of boots, but neither it nor its succubus twin, fascism, is new or can make anything new. It can only reproduce the environment that supports its own health, fear, denial, and an atmosphere in which its victims have lost the will to fight. So basically, so many people have told us, they've been giving us wisdom. We have to find it, and it's not easy to find necessarily, but when you find it, you can find another piece. You got to keep pulling the threads. But people have shown us, like Malcolm X and Toni Morrison and my grandma, your grandma, they all been giving us pieces, and we have to put it together, because none of this is really new. But the worst part is that when we give up the will to fight, they will turn the stuff around and act like you pushing back for your own life is what the problem is, that's hurting them. It's like, no, it's not. It's like people should be able to have their life as well. And if they can convince us, and I'm saying us generally in this collective way, to not fight, to give up on ourselves, to not love ourselves, then they have won, and then we lose everything. So none of this is new. And I think we just have to expect some of this, because they change it a little bit by how it looks, but it's basically the same thing. It's the same core thing, and they just change the outfit of it. And so we know what they're going to do, and we have to just kind of prepare again and find other ways to regroup. And I think what you're doing with the show is one of those ways. I don't think all art does that, and people want to sometimes act like all art is about freedom and this and that. It's not. Some stuff is really with that kind of effort, and it can be a space for bringing people together to, one, learn more, but also to start figuring out how to come together to fight this mess as well. And I think, unfortunately, sometimes in the art world, the capital A art world, they make everything just be this surface. And it's really because it's about art market and commodities and stuff like that. So the actual work of fighting, it goes against the systems that the art market, the commodity world is really about. They don't want to get involved in that. So they just make a conversation about raising awareness, and it's in a very superficial way. But for those people who, like you, are community organizers who work with art as well, you can find ways to make that raising awareness and knowledge being a space of actually, a community gathering and a type of organizing. I think that's where some of the most important work happens.
Yeah, I use it a lot to build a reminder. I've never done a art installation that wasn't a protest in the month of February. So when we picked this date, and I was like, oh, shoot, it's going to be right before our spring breakout, which we call, Black Futures as well. I wanted to make sure that we reminded people why there's even a Black History Month. And it had to start at the beginning when we were brought to this country to where we are now, because the same circumstances are still binding us. And one of the things that gave me and still gives me a little bit of hope is that the fact that during COVID, we had so much time as a world to reflect on everything that was happening to us, that I think when I see now people resigning from jobs, and I'm talking about Black people resigning, saying, you know what, I'm not giving this corporation my business anymore, which is me. I'm not giving them my asset of my value or my intellectual property so that they can make money. I'm going to take this and do it myself. I want to see more of that, because I think that as we define what fascism is inside of this country that we live in and in social spaces that we gather in, that we'll see that once we remove our values from their spaces so that we're not researched and investigated, that creates freedom for us. That creates a different type of power system for us. And it defines us in a different way because they don't have easy access. I've been looking at like TikTok videos where they're like, the price went up, you know, and I'm like, yeah, the price went up. And it's not just about the price going up, it's can you even access me anymore? You cannot use me anymore. I'm not going to be allowed to be a vessel for funneling your goods and services anymore because they're not good for me and they're not good for the community that I came from. And so if nothing else, the big resignation or, you know, whatever that is, and if it's sustainable, which I believe that it is because we do spend a lot of money. And I do believe that American culture is based on Black involvement in this country, that us being here and being able to thrive. And I'm not talking about having economic power, but the fact that we make music and we are culture and we still have the ability to love and sustain our lives through sheer will and courage, that is a culture shift that a lot of people have benefited from. And once we start reclaiming our time and our lives and our futures, I believe that that's going to be a direct opportunity to dismantle these processes, because when we disengage from their system, it becomes weakened. They couldn't have developed America without our labor and without our intellect and with all those inventions and opportunities that were afforded because of the situation that we were in, which was extremely violent. And the fact that now we have a memory of that and it is a current memory and we're trying to build that, we should use that as an empowerment for moving forward. And, you know, you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think you're totally right on about that. It's about refusal. And, you know, various people have told us that. And I saw Malcolm X quote today about freedom. And I don't remember the exact quote, but basically about, you know, freedom, you don't get this really from other people. You get it from yourself, you take it. And I've seen various people talking like that. I was reading Saidiya Hartman's book, Lose Your Mother, where she talks about going back to Ghana, going to Africa and trying to find roots. And she talks about freedom in there. And she says how freedom is this thing that you have to take, and you have to take it again and again, you know, because the assaults keep coming, but we have to find a way to make our freedom happen for ourselves. And part of it is, I think, like you said, is about divesting from vicious systems and making our own, and that part, getting together. And we have to kind of keep doing it. I think we're going to have to keep remaking it. But if anybody can do it, it's Black people. it's Black people, because unfortunately we have had to do it forever, for hundreds of years. And, you know, not saying it's easy and it's not fun, but Black people can do it because they've already done it, but often haven't been the ones to definitely benefit so much from it. And there's something to say about saying no, and saying no for yourself, right? So you just don't allow people to keep treating you like nothing and taking and taking and taking, saying no to that extractive culture. There is something that in that, even though nothing is certain and you don't know for sure what's going to happen tomorrow, something about the fight, the struggle in itself is the freedom. And many people have told us that. We have so many of our ancestors who are freedom fighters who have told us that the struggle in itself is our freedom. It's not about attaining certain goods and all that and having, you know, amassing certain kinds of wealth. It's about standing up for ourselves and for ourselves, our children, our community, for people. That is actually our future. And that's what freedom is. That's anti-fascism in itself.
Exactly. And I just want to go ahead and let you know, like we've made our hour, but this could be a conversation that we could continue for hours, because there's so much context and there's so much information that needs to be shared. But I just wanted to thank you for your time today and thank everybody for tuning in. And I'm going to be sharing this video, and I'm thankful for our ASL so that we can make sure that everybody is included in this conversation. But I might be calling you back to do a part 2, because there's so much going on. And I think that I remember when I first started organizing, we would have these kind of conversations all the time. And even the first time that I met you, you opened up with Toni. I think Toni Morrison had just passed away when you came to Portland to do that event at the museum. And I was just so happy that you had brought her up and that you were able to cite, you know, the information as a resource. And I just think that having conversations gives people a broader opportunity to learn. And so if you had any closing thoughts, I'll leave that for you now. And if not, then we can just adjourn this meeting. But I think that we did share a lot of very useful information. And again, this isn't what I imagined when we brought this event together, but there's so many current social circumstances that are happening to where I was shocked and made to have to just let this be our conversation about how we feel about things. And I hope that people take it to heart and that they do their research and don't be mad at people that are showing up against fascism. Either you're an anti-fascist or you're not. And if you're not, then you're on the side of the oppressor, and the oppressor is already strong enough. But let yourself be known so that we don't mix, because the lines are blurred. The blurred lines are where that misinformation is causing us so much violence. I told my brother, I said, some of the things that people say about protesters out here and the language that they use, I said, it could have the impact of a bullet being put in my body. I've had to worry about that. And I know a lot of other people that have had to worry about that. But the fact that that just occurred again in our community, and I say again, because it's not the first time, I just hope that it doesn't scare people away from showing up against this anti-Blackness that occurs, because we have to uphold white supremacy for the opportunities included in it. We don't have to have those opportunities, and we don't have to uphold those standards of white supremacy.
Yeah, you said it, Teresa. I'm here for anytime you want to be in conversation. I'm here for it because I've admired your work a lot, and you know, I also just want to say it can be daunting, but that we have people. You know, some of it you can find them in these books and stuff, but also just people in communities, and you know, trying to make connections. And these social media spaces or video spaces are not ideal for everything, but they are a way of connecting with people, especially in this time, in the pandemic era and so forth, for us to find people, find information, and believe in ourselves, believe in the past that we have. That's actually a miracle that we are here. Actually, you know, James Baldwin said it, somebody had to love somebody, because that's how we're here today. And I just want to remember that, and you know, pray for all of those people who have that gumption, who get out there and speak back or demonstrate and fight for their rights, fight for our rights, because that's our freedom right there. And without those people, without us doing that, we don't have anything. And we're trying to move on from that. So yeah, I'm here for it. Anytime you want to be in conversation, I'm around.
Awesome. Well, I just want to thank both of our interpreters, Avery and Sarika, for being here with us. I want to thank everybody that helped us bring this together. Another thanks to CFAR for, you know, donating to help us build this installation that's here. Thank you to Holding Contemporary for hosting us in this space. And thank you to all the librarians, archivists, historians, and everybody that knows the truth and is trying to help us continue documenting and sharing the truth. Thank you for all your thankless work, because I know there's a lot of people that would like to flush all that information down the toilet if they could. But we say what we can, and we document what is necessary and share it, and stay mindful that social media has given us a platform where we can tune in on Twitter, or we can tune in on any multiple networks to have these type of conversations. But I think that hearing from each other and listening to each other is a big asset in the fight against racism and white supremacist violence. And so thank you everybody for tuning in, and I hope you have a very safe week, and do what you can to fight racism. Black Power, Black History Month. Thank you. I will figure out how to end this.
Thanks, Teresa.
Yes, thank you. I just had to stop the